So, this gives rise to what is called a memory hierarchy. There are two types of memory, the disk and the buffer, and you cannot directly process on the disk, similarly you cannot store in the buffer. So, let us see a little more detail of the operation of the disk, which will be helpful for our further analysis. So, if we consider a single disk, as I have mentioned, that there are tracks, some track number, and the head, it does not rotate. It can either move out of the track or inside the track. It can only do this type of movement. And when the head wants to read a sector of the disk, it moves to that particular track, and since the disk is anyway rotating, it waits for that sector to come under the head, only then it reaches the head. By the way, uh, the writing something to the disk actually takes twice the time as reading, because in writing you have to first write it once, then read it once to check it is properly written. Okay, so writing and reading is done. With this mechanism of uh, input output read and write, there are two times that are important. One is the seek time. The time it takes once a request to read or write to a particular track comes, time it takes from for the head to move from its current position to that track. Not that it is moving radially outside or inside, that is the seek time. Similarly, there is a latency, which is once it reaches that particular track, how much time it takes for that particular sector to rotate and come to that track, to the under the head. The seek time is often larger than the latency. There is a third time, which is called the transfer time. Which is measured by bytes per second or bits per second in SATA disks, serial time, serial transfer. So, which is basically after this head reads, how much time it takes to transfer it to the buffer memory. Okay. So, the combination of these three time determines the time cost of one read or write operation. So, there are certain strategies to optimize this. For example, if I know some query will continuously need some data, I will try to put it in the same track, so that the seek time is minimized. Okay. So, I will try to make all file continuous in a track. If it is spread over multiple tracks, I call it a fragmented file. I do not want fragmented file. To minimize this access time, the movement of the head is controlled by something called a disk controller. Disk controller. What the disk controller does, moment a read or write request, so the request will come in the following manner. It will come that read sector I of track J, and the head will move to the track and wait for that sector to come. So, this movement is controlled by some algorithm. One of the algorithm to control it is called the elevator algorithm or elevator seeding algorithm. Okay. So, what the elevator seeding algorithm does is that it does in the following. So, if you know how an elevator works, if you have suppose there are several floors of a building and they have pressed a button to request an elevator, maybe the 4th floor, the 5th floor, 3rd floor, in some order they have first this, then this, then this in some order. So what a elevator does is that it goes up. If it goes up, it goes on serving the requests that come above the floor that has that it is currently in, and keeps on serving them till the highest request comes. So as it goes up till the highest request, till the highest floor where the request is available, and then it turns down, and in the route it keeps on processing the request. It goes down till the lowest floor from where the request is available. It goes down and down till that. Never, basically, it goes up, it never turns back. It goes up till the highest point, goes down till the lowest point, again goes up till the highest point, goes down till the lowest point. If while it is going up, there is a request from below, this request has to wait before this. Okay. Say for example, the elevator is currently in the first floor. This is the current position, and I have a set of requests 2, 5, 4, 3, 2 again. So what it would do? It will request to, first process 2 go to 5, and in the between it has 4, it will serve 4. In the between it has 3, serve 3, but it will never serve 2. It will come back again and then serve 2. Okay. So in this way it will do. So this is the elevator scheduling algorithm. This is implemented and shown to give the optimal, the minimum time, average time required to process it. So as we have told that the data from the disk is temporarily stored in the buffer. So when the query is processed, if some data is already there in the buffer, I need not read a disk. Note that a point to be always kept in mind is that the disk read and write are very costly compared to buffer. To give you an idea, the ratio of the time required to get a data from the disk as compared to get a data from the buffer is the same of ratio of from say from here to my table that I am sitting in front, and from here to moon, that is the ratio. So getting data from disk is comparable to getting data from moon, which is very far away, and getting data from buffer is comparable to getting data from just my table in front of me. So you should always avoid disk access. You should always go for buffer access. So can we sort of guess? That means in future, if some data is required, I try to keep it in the buffer beforehand. Okay, but the problem is buffer is limited in size. So sometimes I have to clear the buffer to accommodate more data. So this method is called a buffer replacement strategy. Okay. So the idea is like this: you have a buffer and you have a disk. A buffer consists of a set of blocks. Which is the unit of data. So movement of data, reading from the disk to buffer and writing from buffer to disk, happens in units of blocks, one block at a time, not less than one block. A block is typically 512 kilobyte. So it consists of a number of blocks, and now when the buffer is full and you want to get more data, you have to evict, you have to remove some data from the buffer and write it out to the disk. Okay. So this eviction process is controlled by something called a buffer replacement strategy. There are two strategies. That means the in MRU the data has been which has been most recently accessed, that is removed. So you use it, immediately you throw it out, and other one you remove the old data, the data which is very old, you throw it out. Let me take an example. Take a simple loop. I'm just writing the pseudo code. So it takes an array X and then updates the increments every element of the array. But the array is so large, you cannot keep in the entire thing in the buffer. It is in the disk. So what you do here, you see 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 10. So the data which is old, say when I am processing the 50th X, I can remove the first X. So in this case, it will be the LRU. Whereas in some other cases, MRU may be more efficient. So which strategy you choose depends on the query, the kind of procedure you are executing. Many of these you have studied in your operating system course also. There is another concept called a print block. That means some block I know is repeatedly required. For example, uh, say there is another thing y, another variable y, and every xi I want to make it to y plus 1. So y is always required. So what I do, I pin y buffer. I never remove it from the buffer. Okay. So you have to identify this frequently used data and pin it. Uh, there are many other buffer management strategies. Again, in the slides they are there, you can go through them. If you have any questions so far, you may please ask, I will be happy to answer. Just type in the chat box. Even if it is okay, you have understood, you can type. Otherwise, I will move forward. Query so far? Of course, I repeat again that I am only giving an overview. There are many more details which, depending on your interest, I can tell. For sake of time, I am just not explaining them. Okay. So this buffer manager and the disk controller, they do their best to get the data. Now the question is that see this file is I stored the tables in, and they are arranged as blocks in the disk. So can I do this more intelligently so that they are arranged continuously in the disk, I can more easily access them. So this gives rise to the second part of storage manager. The first part was hard disk controller and the buffer manager. The second part is called a file manager. So the structure is like this. You have your table. A and B. You have records or tuples of the table. each row of the table. These numbers, these values would be organized continuously in file. What is a file? It is a set of blocks. Block 1, block 2, block 3. And these records be arranged inside these blocks. And blocks themselves should be arranged inside a file. So, two structures: a record which goes inside blocks, blocks together form a file. A file together occupies sectors and tracks of disks. Sectors and tracks in the disk. So, there are two things we need to worry about. One is the block structure, one is the file structure. I will first answer the question. I will first discuss whether there are two cases. One is fixed length records. Where every row has same number of bytes. Every row in a table has same number of bytes. Another is a variable length record. How does, where each row has a different number of bytes. How does variable length records appear? They do in the following way. See, there is one attribute type which sort of so suppose you are writing some comment in Facebook. So how long will be the comment? How many characters it will come? You don't know. Or you are uploading some image. What is the size of the image? So this image, text, they are also attributes in the Facebook's table structure. So these are called large objects. So one is a character large object called a CLOB, where text is stored. Another is a binary large object where image, video, music are stored, is called a blob. Large object, character large object and binary large object. So they give rise to this valuable length records. Okay. So let us see how fixed length records are stored. It is very simple. What you actually do is that you in your block. So suppose this is your block. You just stored your records one after the other. Only thing to be taken care of is that one record or one row, one tuple doesn't get split into two blocks. The reason is because here I have mentioned that your read write is in units of blocks. So you read one block, so it should not be split, otherwise you will need two block read to read a record. So this is very simple. You store But one problem with this approach is, suppose I have deleted one record, I have deleted few records and want to add one more record. So what do I add? Do I say block is full, or how do I know it is this position which is empty? Okay. So what is done in this case is the following. The header of the block has something called a header. It has a pointer to the next free location, and the free location in turn has a pointer to the second free location, which will have a pointer to maybe the third free location. So when you are deleting a block, say I delete this record, the last free location will add a pointer to this newly freed block. Will add a pointer, and so this way basically I'll maintain a linked list of a called a free list, all the free locations. This is possible only if all records are of equal size. And how do I enter a new record? I'll consider the header. See the first free location, I'll write my data there, and the header will now contain not the first free location, but it will repoint to the, so this pointer will get copied to here and the data will, so now header will point to this next free location. This pointer I'll first copy to header. So basically the head of the linked list of free list will move to the second position, and this will contain the, for the variable length record we have something called a slotted place structure. This is not possible in variable length. So what it does is the following. Initially it contains, there is a header part and there is a data part. The header part contains how many record it contains and the starting address of all the records, and the data part contains the, from the other side, the actual record which may be a variable. So each of these will point, and when I delete my record, just this entry gets deleted and the corresponding entry gets deleted, and this is moved. Okay, this is moved. This is relatively more complex. This is the organization of records in blocks. Now I move to the next part, which is heap file, where the blocks are not sorted in any order. You write them down in the file, arbitrary order. So it is very easy to insert, very easy to delete. But the problem is that what you have to do is that you have to, when you access, the access time changes. Then there is a sorted file. Okay, where based on some attribute value, the records and blocks are sorted and they are put in the file in the sorted order. The thing is that insertion and deletion is difficult here. You have to sometimes reorganize also to maintain sorting, but accessing is difficult. For example, if you want to access a record, you have to do a complete scan of this file to find all records where say salary is 10%. But in a sorted, if it is sorted on salary, you can do binary search and do it in less time. Okay, so these are the different methods. Sometimes what is done in a heap file structure to quickly access the the particular record in a file, you use something called an index. Let me define. So, it is just a data structure. So, let me give an example. So, in the book, a book, suppose a big database book by Silvershire Scott. So, in the beginning of the semester, when you have ample time, maybe you read the table of content, which is given in the beginning of the book, to see which chapters contain which material. But before the day before the exam, when you don't have time and you have to read such a big book, you don't see the beginning of the book, you see something in the end of the book called an index. So, what the index does, it contains some alphabets, maybe say file manager, some keywords, some strings sorted on alphabetical order, file manager, then concurrency controller. In some topics, they are arranged in alphabetical order. This is not in alphabetical order in the end of the book. And then you have a list of pages which contain that concept. Okay. So, this is a topic, a value, in our case some attribute value, maybe the salary or something, salary equal to 1000. So, this is sorted and these are pointers to the pages, the page numbers, the indices which contain this. So, the similar structure here would be there will be pointers to each and every block of the file. And there will be another data structure which tells that okay, the records of all CS students are in pointer P1 and in pointer P2. Records of all E student are in pointer 3, pointer 4 and so on. So, basically what this is an index, it contains a attribute value called a key and a pointer. So, it is a key pointer pair. Which says that key means attribute. So, depending on what attribute you choose, what key you choose, you can have different indices. So, it says that this attribute value, say department equal to CS, is available in this pointer locations in the file. This pointer locations in the file. This structure is called an index. What is the utility of this index? It helps you to, instead of scanning the entire file, reading the entire file, it helps you to quickly answer a query. Just directly go to the pointer. So, sometimes what is happening is that these indices themselves are very big. So, to find out an index entry itself, you have to scan a lot of data. So, what we have second level indices on indices. So, like one index structure to find out the proper entry in the lower level index, and from the lower level index you find that entry to the file pointer. So, these are called multi-level indices. Often they take a structure of a tree. So, I will explain one indices called a tree index. Let me draw it. I'll write down the definition, then I'll explain. So the leaf node will have some key values on some. So you build a tree index on some attribute. Say let's say on the department of a student, I build a B plus tree index. Okay. So the child will contain some key values and file pointers together. Okay. And these key values will be in sorted order. So first, second, third, fourth sorted order. And then there will be a pointer between them. The non-leaf node will contain a key value. So all key values between K1 and K2 will be here, K2 and K3 will be here, K3 and K4 will be greater than K4 will be here, okay, and so on hierarchically. And it will contain a key value and a pointer to the child node containing that key value, and this in a hierarchical manner. There is a restriction, we have something called a order of a tree. N. Which basically we choose that depending on what is the, it determines how many child a tree can have. So any node can have between n to n minus 1 by 2 nodes, or sometimes n by 2 nodes, depending on the notation, n by 2 nodes between this. So it cannot have more than n node, it cannot have less than n minus 2 node, except the root, and some n minus 1 I have rooted because there sometimes the extra pointer for this connector, you take the n minus 1. So if any node becomes more than that, you split it into two. The moments it exceeds n plus 1, you make it n by 2, n plus 1 by 2. Okay, sorry, n by 2, n minus 1 by 2. You split it. So this way you keep the tree balanced. And how do you do? When you are searching for all records having some value, you just go through the root, compare. If less than K2, come here. less than some other value, say K10, come here, go to the corresponding leaf, and the leaf will contain file pointers, go to the corresponding file notation. Okay. So, this is the structure. There is an alternate structure called a B tree, where these values are not repeated. So, if it is K1 greater than K3, this K1 value will no longer appear in the leaf. Similarly, K10 will not appear in the leaf, which is smaller but more difficult to constant. If there are total capital L number of leaves, it takes logarithm L order search time to find a pointer. So, one exercise I would like to give you, that I give you some set of key values, say 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 10, and I give you your order of the tree is 3. Order is determined by the size of a block. You want one leaf to stay in a block, and the byte size of the key and the pointers. So, you draw a B plus tree storing these 10 values of order. Now, if you have any question, please ask on this indexing part, please ask. I am sure there will be questions. Please in your chat window ask. There are many other type of tree indices also, KD tree, R tree, several others which are required for high dimensional indexing, which can be. But any query regarding this? Okay. So, what I will do, let me give you a 5-minute time. You discuss among yourself, ask question. The chat window is taking some time to come. You put it in the chat window. I'll take a 5-minute break. I'll come back and answer all your queries. What I urge, meanwhile, you try the question putting 10 numbers in a B plus T of order n equal to 3, and any questions you face, you ask me. I'll come back in 5 minutes and answer all of them and move to the next topic. Thank you. Take a 5-minute break. Welcome back. Thank you for the questions. So, I have two type of major question. One is when to use a multi-level index. The answer is that if the size of the index, see the index is own size also, it has a number of entries, then pointers. If the size of the index is big enough, that means to access the index itself lot of time is required, then in that case we use multi-level index, index on a index. In the highest level index, so for example, I have some key value, say I want to find the build a index of account number of all bank account holders in, say, State Bank of India. There are millions of users. So, if I build a index structure, it will be too large. So, what I do, I will use a high level index, maybe in the highest level there is a index structure on the account holders in 4 regions of India, north, east, west and south. That is the highest level, only 4 entries. Then in each level I have state wise, then at each level I have district wise, then at each level I have a block wise, and then individual branch wise, then so this way, when what you do is that if you arrange in this multiple level, the index space requirement will be larger, but the time to search a index will be reduced. So, in case of very large databases, we use multi-level indices. I hope this answers your question. There is another question, what is a multi-value dependency, from the previous class. I will quickly answer it. Consider a course relation. There are 4 attributes: course ID, course name, a teacher of the course, another person, and textbook of the course. Now, suppose two of these attributes have multiple values. For example, there are two teachers who is teaching this course. Similarly, there might be two textbook prescribed for the course. So, if I want to keep all this information in the database, it will look like this. Suppose one of the teacher is PM and the textbook is Silver Sach Scott Sudarshan, and then again course ID DBMS. There is another teacher, let us say PPC, and there is this book. Again the course DBMS, teacher PM, another textbook called Garcia Molina Ullman. So, see, if there are two teachers for the course and two textbook for the course, to represent a single course, I need these 4 entries: same course ID, same course name, 2 pairs of teacher and 2 pairs of textbook. So, PM against SKS, PM against JMU, PPC against SKS, PPC against JMU. Okay. So, suppose I have I can write a multi-valued dependency, course ID, one of them, there are others also, denoted by a double arrow. Teacher. So, in general, if you have a multi-valued dependency, alpha determines multi-valued determines beta, then if I have 4 tuples, T1 4 rows, it basically see, the normal functional dependency is a value oriented, means if another entry has this course ID, it has to have this course name. This is a row generating, that means if there are 2 entries having this and this, there has to be another 2 entry having this and this. Or is the total schema. So, there is this cross, this beta part of T1 should match part of, so this should match T3. If this matches T3, sorry, if T1 beta equal to T3 beta and T2 beta equals T4 beta, if this matches this and this matches this, then T1 R minus beta has to match T4 R minus beta, and T2 R minus beta has to match T3 R minus beta. That means if this matches this, there should be another entry. If this matches this should match this. If this matches this should match this. So the alternate cross should match. Okay. In such a case, we say that there exists a multi-valued dependency. And just we have BCNF where all the functional dependencies are normalized. If all the multi-valued dependencies are normalized, we have the like the definition of the BCNF, we have the fourth normal form. Okay, so I hope this clarifies. If you have further question, tell me. There is another question. If ABC is the candidate key in a relation R ABCDE and ABD determines E, then is FD a partial functional dependency? ABD determines E is an FD, and ABC is a candidate key. Then it is a full functional dependency. It is not just partial. It is a full functional dependency. Okay, because I can reduce it using the Armstrong axioms. There is another question that in what instance or application we prefer B plus T. Okay, so this I have already mentioned. When you have a large index, you prefer a B plus T. By the way, this B3, B plus T, they are single attribute indices. If you have multi-dimension, you go for a R3, KD3, and so on. Okay, I think I'll now move on to the next topic. Again, there are three parts. You have a SQL query, you parse it to a expression. So, for example, if I have the SQL query, suppose this is a sample SQL query. So, what the query person will do, and these are the tables, it will first convert into an expression like this. So, this is the expression. It will write this expression as an expression tree. It will look like this. Okay. So, the nodes of the expression tree are operators, leaves are the relations, the tables. So, I have two relations R and S. This is the Cartesian product operation. On top of that, the selection operation. On top of that, the projection operation. So, this expression tree is corresponding to this statement, corresponding to this SQL query. So, this I think is clear to you. Given a SQL query, you can draw the expression tree first by converting here. So, what there is something called a query optimizer. What the query optimizer does is that it considers first a means of computing these basic operations sigma, phi. I'll soon explain you how to compute these basic operations, and then attaches a cost. Valuation, okay, which is often related to the time you require to evaluate the query. which again will be, because see most of the time is not that one important thing in database is that the addition, subtraction, comparison, they don't take much time. Most time is spent in fetching the data from the disk. So how much amount of data you have to fetch to compute this query, that constitutes the time or cost of the query. Okay. So what this optimizer does is that it sort of finds out alternate trees that would evaluate this query, various forms of the tree that would evaluate this query, and choose the one having the least cost. For example, I can have an alternate tree like this. So A is relating to R. I first apply the sigma, then do the Cartesian product, then do the phi. Okay, this is an alternate tree. Here, this I have to read to memory, this I have to read, but this is smaller. So this Cartesian product will take less time. Okay, so I evaluate the cost and take the minimum cost. This is the job of the query optimizer. Query optimization is one of the hardest problem in database management system, finding out the optimal query. It can be shown to an equivalent to an NP-hard problem. And if any one of you can have an intelligent algorithm to find out the best query. So by the way, this different way of how we will do this is called a query plan. It gives you the step-by-step actions which you do to get the answer to that. This is called a query plan. So a query plan is slightly different from this. You have different methods. So algorithm for finding what index you use to compute this. So all this will be forming part of the query plan. So index or algorithm. So finding an efficient algorithm to find the best query plan is still an open problem. You can, you are young people, you can try. Now let's go into details of the steps. Primitive operations I will call. How to have basic algorithm. Note that the difference here is you have all the data in a disk in blocks. How to efficiently do this? So the selection, there are two methods again. You can linearly scanning or you can use an index. I would quickly give you an exercise that you have already built the tree for some key values 1 to 10 using n equal to 3. Can you give me an algorithm using this index to find out all the records which have the key value less than 5? Using this index, I would answer that. So that will give me sigma a greater than 5, less than 5, that answer to that query. So just think on it. I have another question. What is a fully functional dependency? This I'm not sure what you mean by this. There is a functional dependency and there is a trivial functional dependency. Full functional dependency, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll look up. If you mail me, I'll answer you. Now another thing called sorting. Suppose you have a file containing large number of blocks and some key values. I want to sort the file so that they are ascending or descending in terms of the key value. The problem is I have only a limited amount of memory which I can use to do this. Okay. In such situation, you use something called a external memory merge sort. What you do? You part by part sort. Take one part to the buffer, sort it, write it down to a run file. Take another part, sort it, write it down to another run file. So these are small parts of the file which are individually sorted. Then you use merge sort to merge them to the final file. Okay, this is the strategy. So similarly, there are many other methods for doing joining, for doing Cartesian product, which uses these techniques and on the external memory to do it. Again, for lack of time, I am not covering them. In the textbook, they are nicely explained. In my slides also, they are explained. You can go through them. So since I have only half an hour, maybe I'll move to the next topic, which is for the sake of coverage, which is on something called transactions. In between, if you have any quick question, you can type it. I'll look at it, and maybe I'll cover them. Just type it if you have a quick question or any topic. I'll send you material. I'll just take 2 minutes and look at your question. A set of action which you perform together to accomplish a task. For example, you want to withdraw money from ATM. You first give your card, give your PIN, inquire the balance, give an amount to be withdrawn. It checks whether that amount is there, gives you the money, updates the balance, and then ends the transaction. Okay, so this is an example of a transaction. It is a set of tasks. Now this transactions has to satisfy certain properties. I'll write them down. Okay, because if you withdraw the money and the account is not updated, then that is not proper. Consistency is violated. So this is the first property. This is implemented by something called a it is, so you have the steps of the transaction S1, S2, S3 and so on. When these steps are going on, it is called an active state. Sorry, so in the beginning you have the start, it goes to the active state. When the last action is committed, it is called a partial commit state. all the result of actions are not returned to the at the end of each transaction, the outputs are returned to the hard disk. Before that is done, but all actions are over, you first shall commit. From that, it can either commit or it can abort. If it aborts, it will come back to the start state. Okay. So this helps you in maintaining atomicity. So basically, it is your database manager which will ensure that atomicity is maintained. Okay. So in the before the transaction starts, if all the constants are satisfied, if all the constants are satisfied, we say the database is in a consistent state. After the transaction also, that should not be disturbed. For example, I have a rule that my balance is this much, and it does not change unless you do. So maybe I transfer money from one account to another. The sum of balance is this. So before the transaction, what is the sum of balance of two parties who are transferring money? After the transaction, the sum of the balance would remain the same. So if you deduct from one, add to another, that should remain constant. So it is the job of the programmer who is writing the transaction to ensure this. That means when I am one transaction is doing some job, it need not care what the other transaction is doing. It is independent on its own, in its own way. It goes on doing. It doesn't care what the other transaction does. And if in the process still consistency is maintained, then we say that these two transactions are isolated. It is the job of the concurrency controller. There are two ways to execute transactions, more transactions. One is called a serial execution. That means one transaction starts, it is over, then the next transaction starts, and so on. Another is concurrent execution. Where they together, they access the same data, they access the same table, together they run. So the concurrency controller job is to ensure isolation under concurrent execution. We'll see some concurrency control. Basically, you use locks and similar mechanisms to do that. once the transaction makes some change, that change is there forever. So if you have deposited some money in the bank and your account balance is updated, come what may, the bank cannot change it. Even if their computer crashes, something happens, it has to still maintain that. It has to maintain a record how much money you have. Okay. So it is the job of the recovery manager to maintain this. Okay. So we will actually look at two concepts, concurrency controller and recovery manager, in more details. Concurrent execution. Okay. So for example, there are more, suppose I have two transactions, T1 and T2. Usually I'll write them by this notation. And suppose they do, they have a, there is one record X that it wants to, R T1 reads X, then it makes X equal to X plus 1, let's say, then it writes X. This is one transaction. Then the transaction T2 again reads X from the disk, diminishes X by 1, writes X to the disk. So this is transaction T1, this is transaction T2. This is how it is. So what the concurrency controller may do is that it will first, it will do in this, allow this, allow this, allow this, then allow this, then allow this, allow this. This is called a schedule of execution. So the concurrency controller generates schedules of execution. This particular example, this is a data element, which may be a record or a table or whatever. So this schedule is called a serial schedule because T1 ends, then T2 starts. Similarly, I may have a concurrent schedule. They are interspaced. Finally, actually all of them will have a command called commit. Whatever is their output, write to hard disk. In fact, we will see later that is only these read write operations which are important. What happens in between need not be considered. Is a serial schedule, but all concurrent schedules are not consistent. They are not isolated. They may give erroneous result. So there is a class of concurrent schedule which is called serializable schedule. That means by some transformation you can convert it to a serial schedule, which are of interest to us. So let us see what is a serializable schedule. pairs. So, if a read by transaction 1, I call it as R1 on data item X, and then there is another read by transaction 2 on data item X, they are not conflicting, both reads. If transaction 1 tries to read X and transaction 2 tries to write X, it is conflicting. Similarly, this is conflicting. This is surely conflicting. So, only read are non-conflicting. So, we do a transformation is interchange that means here for example this read I can interchange. So, I can make this read first and this read next. This transformation I am allowed to make, whereas this read write I cannot swap, this read write I cannot swap, this write I cannot swap. So, only read transactions on same data item are swappable, interchangeable. If I am given a concurrent schedule and by a number of such interchanges I can transform it to a serial schedule, then that particular schedule is said to be, this is a non-conflicting transformation. Non-conflicting can convert a serial, a concurrent schedule to a serial schedule, then the concurrent schedule is called a conflict serializable schedule. Schedule. Okay. So, you can convert it to a serial schedule. Here we always look for serializable schedule. Actually, there is an easier way of testing it, that what you have to do is that you draw something called uh, a precedence graph. That means you have each of the transaction as nodes of the graph, T1 versus and T2. If there is a conflicting order, you draw an edge, directed edge. If in this precedence graph there is a cycle, it is not a serializable schedule. If there are no cycles, only then it is a serializable schedule. So, now how do we get this? There are two more properties that we know. One is called a recoverable schedule. That means suppose there is a concurrent schedule, one of the schedule aborts. Do I need to abort the other schedule also? Okay, do I need to abort? There is I'll give you a very interesting example. Suppose you and your brother are together solving a problem, and what you are doing is that some part of the calculation you are asking your brother to do, and whatever your brother is doing, you are copying it back to your copy. So, you are concurrently executing both of these. So what you have done, your brother has done some calculation, you have copied it in your copy, you have finished your calculation and you have submitted the answer script to the teacher. And after that you find that your brother has changed his calculation. He has made a mistake, he has deleted his calculation and made some change. The problem is that this error is still there in your program and you have already submitted to the teacher, you cannot get it back. Okay, so that is the situation. Two people concurrently executing. One of the transaction has committed, whereas the other transaction which has used some result of this, the committed transaction used some its result, has aborted. Now the committed transaction, once it has committed, it cannot abort. So such schedules would be called a non-recoverable schedules. We also want to avoid them. There is a host of concurrency control protocols like lock manager, two-phase locking. What the lock managers do, they control the sequence of actions by locking data items and then releasing that lock. So there are two-phase locking, timestamp, many other protocols which do this. Unfortunately, I have the slides for all of them, but I do not have time to cover them. Maybe you can look up the slides and tell me. So there are timestamp, multiversion control. Finally, I'll tell you one thing is a recovery manager. In case of failure, what it happens? The most common method is what is called a log based recovery. So whatever change you want to make to the database, you first write a log of that log file. And once you have saved this log file, you make the change. So in case you have to undo the change, you can consult the log file and do something called undo or a redo recovery to abort the transaction, undo the effect. Okay, so you go back the log file, see which transactions aborted, undo their effect from the log file, and then get back the database to the state where it was before the cache. Okay, of course, details are there. You can go through my slides. All these details are there. So now I'll ask you to tell some question. By the way, today is the last day of the course. So if you have, I am extremely sorry I could not do details to many of the topics which are very important. If you have any query, this is my email. This is my name. Slides will be more helpful, but even further, like some of the advanced like NoSQL, eventual consistency which are used, I have not covered. I have the slides. You please mail me. And now, if you have any questions, you can ask me. I'll wait for the question. It was a nice experience. I have had a look at all of you. I am very happy that I have this opportunity of teaching to you. All of you are very bright students. Of course, database is a very important topic in industry as well as research. My slides are there. There are many more new interesting topics, new projects that you can do, small implementations that you can do. If you mail me, I'll be happy to interact. And the best way to learn database is to actually build a system using the database, which gives you the experience, which will be useful for industry also. So please go ahead, explore and learn, and best wishes. I'm happy we'll meet soon. Again, have the opportunity. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll answer. Thank you, everybody. So I don't see any question. If you can mail me always. Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure teaching to you. Best of luck, and please explore and study this subject. Best of luck again. Best wishes. Thank you. Bye.